Welcome to George MacDonald and Us. Hello, everyone.
Hello.
We're back. We really enjoyed hearing from our listeners about the great debate that Sean and I had about whether or not the Grail that Galahad found in our previous episode was physical or purely metaphorical. And we even have a poll on Spotify, and the vote for it's purely metaphysical is winning by a landslide.
1-0.
We have one voter, and that is what they voted for. But there's still 4 days. Well, wait. Yeah, as of this recording, there's still 4 days left. So it's anybody's game at this point. We had one listener inform us kindly that it should be a hard G in the sun. So in the title of the poem, San Grail. And we had another listener recommend looking at George MacDonald's unspoken sermons. If you're curious about what the Grail would have meant for George MacDonald, to read his unspoken sermons. And
yeah, some of his themes come throughout the sermons. I know that are similar. So
yeah, so thank you, listeners, for your input. We really appreciate it a lot. I also want us to celebrate that we have followers now on Spotify and Apple Podcasts, and we have our first subscriber on YouTube, and we're really excited to see this podcast grow and reach listeners. And we even have listeners in Sweden who listen on Spotify. So hello. I have always wanted to learn Norwegian or Swedish. I can speak some German. I used to teach German, but I'm pretty rusty. And I just tried learning Manx, which is a language in the Isle of Man. And Sean kind of inspired me because he was trying to learn Cornish. And there's this website that it does like Cornish, Manx, and Spanish, I think, is randomly thrown in there. And
Dutch, maybe?
Maybe it's Dutch. And I was just really rocking the Manx. Like, I wonder if some of my ancestors come from the Isle of Man or something, because I was just picking up on that language. I'm trying to even think if I know anything right now. Rut is with you, I believe. Wow, I can't believe I remember that. Okay. So tonight we have for you, we're going to do a short story again, and we're going to break it up into 2 parts. And the short story that we are going to read for you and then discuss is The Giant's Heart by George MacDonald. And this is in his fairy tale collection. Is that right, Sean?
Yeah. The Complete Fairy Tales.
Yep, and it is in the public domain as well. So we'll have a link to it for you. But sit back and enjoy listening to the first half of The Giant's Heart, read by our very own Sean.
The Giant's Heart. There was once a giant who lived on the borders of Giant Land, where it touched on the country of common people. Everything in Giant Land was so big that the common people saw only a mass of awful mountains and clouds, and no living man had ever come from it, as far as anybody knew, to tell what he had seen in it. Somewhere near the borders, on the other side, by the edge of a great forest, lived a laborer with his wife and a great many children. One day, Trixie Wee, as they called her, teased her brother, Buffy Bob, till he could not bear it any longer, and gave her a box on the ear. Trixie Wee cried, and Buffy Bob was so sorry and so ashamed of himself that he cried too, and ran off into the wood. He was so long gone that Trixie Wee began to be frightened, for she was very fond of her brother, and she was so distressed that she had first teased him and then cried, that at last she ran into the wood to look for him, though there was more chance of losing herself than of finding him. And indeed, so it seemed likely to turn out, for, running on without looking, she at length found herself in a valley she knew nothing about, And no wonder, for what she thought was a valley with round, rocky sides was no other than the space between two of the roots of a great tree that grew on the borders of Giant Land. She climbed over the side of it and went towards what she took for a black, round-topped mountain far away, but which she soon discovered to be close to her and to be a hollow place so great that she could not tell what it was hollowed out of. Staring at it, she found it was a doorway, and going nearer and staring harder, she saw the door far in with a knocker of iron upon it, a great many yards above her head, and as large as the anchor of a big ship. Now nobody had ever been unkind to Trixie Wee, and therefore she was not afraid of anybody. For Buffy Bob's box on the ear she did not think worth considering. So spying a little hole at the bottom of the door, which had been nibbled by some giant mouse, she crept through it and found herself in an enormous hall. She could not have seen the other end of it at all, except for the great fire that was burning there, diminished to a spark in the distance. Towards this fire she ran as fast as she could, and was not far from it when something fell before her with a great clatter, over which she tumbled, and went rolling on the floor. She was not much hurt, however, and got up in a moment. Then she saw what she had fallen over was not unlike a great iron bucket. When she examined it more closely, she discovered that it was a thimble, and looking up to see who had dropped it, beheld a huge face, with spectacles as big as round windows in a church, bending over her and looking everywhere for the thimble. Trixie Wee immediately laid hold of it in both her arms and lifted it about an inch near to the nose of the peering giantess. This movement made the old lady see where it was, and, her finger popping into it, it vanished from the eyes of Trixie Wee, buried in the folds of a white stocking like a cloud in the sky, which Mrs. Giant was busy darning. For it was Saturday night, and her husband would wear nothing but white stockings on Sunday. To be sure, he did eat little children, but only very little ones. And if ever it crossed his mind that it was wrong to do so, he always said to himself that he wore whiter stockings on Sunday than any other giant in all of Giantland. At the same instant, Trixie Wee heard a sound like the wind in a tree full of leaves, and could not think what it could be, till looking up, she found that it was the giantess whispering to her, and when she tried very hard, she could hear what she said well enough. "Run away, dear girl," she said, "as fast as you can, for my husband will be home in a few minutes." "But I've never been naughty to your husband," said Trixie Wee, looking up in the giantess's face. "That doesn't matter. You had better go. He is fond of little children, particularly little girls." "Oh, then he won't hurt me." "I am sure of that. He is so fond of them that he eats them up, and I am afraid he couldn't help hurting you a little. He is a very good man, though." "Oh, then," began Trixie Wee, feeling rather frightened, but before she could finish her sentence, she heard the sound of footsteps very far apart and very heavy. The next moment, who should come running towards her full speed and as pale as death but Buffy Bob? She held out her arms, and he ran into them. But when she tried to kiss him, she only kissed the back of his head, for his white face and round eyes were turned to the door. "Run, children, run and hide," said the giantess. "Come, Buffy," said Trixie. "Yonder's a great break. We'll hide in it." The break was a big broom, and they had just got into the bristles of it when they heard the door open with a sound of thunder, and in stalked the giant. You would have thought you saw the whole earth through the door when he opened it, so wide was it. And when he closed it, it was like nightfall. "Where is that little boy?" he cried, with a voice like the bellowing of a cannon. He looked a very nice boy indeed. I'm almost sure he crept through the mouse hole at the bottom of the door. "Where is he, my dear?" "I don't know," answered the giantess. "But you know it is wicked to tell lies, don't you, my dear?" retorted the giant. "Now, you ridiculous old thunderthump," said his wife, with a smile as broad as the sea in the sun. "How can I mend your white stockings and look after little boys? You have got plenty to last you over Sunday, I am sure. Just look what good little boys they are." Trixie Wee and Buffy Bob peered through the bristles and discovered a row of little boys, about a dozen, with very fat faces and goggle eyes, sitting before the fire and looking stupidly into it. Thunderthump intended the most of these for pickling, and was feeding them well before salting them. Now and then, however, he could not keep his teeth off them, and would eat one by the by without salt. He strode up to the wretched children. Now what made them very wretched indeed was that they knew if they could only keep from eating and grow thin, the giant would dislike them, and turn them out to find their way home. But notwithstanding this, so greedy were they, that they ate as much as ever they could hold. The giantess who fed them comforted herself with thinking that they were not real boys and girls, but only little pigs pretending to be boys and girls. "Now tell me the truth," cried the giant, bending his face down over them. They shook with terror, and everyone hoped it was somebody else the giant liked best. "Where is the little boy that ran into the hall just now? Whoever tells me a lie shall be instantly boiled." "He's in the broom," cried one dough-faced boy. "He's in there, and a little girl with him." "The naughty children," cried the giant, "to hide from me," and he made a stride towards the broom. "Catch hold of the bristles, Bobby. Get right into a tuft, and hold on," cried Tricksy Wee, just in time. The giant caught up the broom, and seeing nothing under it, set it down again with a force that threw them both on the floor. He then made 2 strides to the boys, caught the dough-faced one by the neck, took the lid off a great pot that was boiling on the fire, popped him in as if he had been a trussed chicken, put the lid on again, and saying, "There, boys, see what comes of lying," asked no more questions, for, as he always kept his word, he was afraid he might have to do the same to them all. And he did not like boiled boys. He liked to eat them crisp as radishes, whether forked or not, ought to be eaten. He then sat down and asked his wife if his supper was ready. She looked into the pot, and throwing the boy out with a ladle as if he had been a black beetle that had tumbled in and had had the worst of it, answered that she thought it was. Whereupon he rose to help her, and taking the pot from the fire, poured the whole contents, bubbling and splashing, into a dish like a vat. Then they sat down to supper. The children in the broom could not see what they had, but it seemed to agree with them, for the giant talked like thunder, and the giantess answered like the sea, and they grew chattier and chattier. At length the giant said, "I don't feel quite comfortable about the heart of mine," and as he spoke, instead of laying his hands on his bosom, he waved it away towards the corner where the children were peeping from the broom bristles, like frightened little mice. "Well, you know, my darling Thunderthump," answered his wife, "I always thought it ought to be nearer home, but you know best, of course." "Ha ha! You don't know where it is, wife. I moved it a month ago." "What a man you are, Thunderthump. You trust any creature alive rather than your own wife." Here the giantess gave a sob which sounded exactly like a wave going flop into the mouth of a cave up to the roof. "Where have you got it now?" she resumed, checking her emotion. "Well, Doodlem, I don't mind telling you," answered the giant soothingly. "The great she-eagle has got it for a nest egg. She sits on it night and day, and thinks she will bring the greatest eagle out of it that ever sharpened his beak on the rocks of Mount Skycrack. I can warrant no one else will touch it while she has got it. But she is rather capricious, and I confess I am not easy about it, for the least scratch of one of her claws would do for me at once, and she has claws. I refer anyone who doubts this part of my story to certain chronicles of Giantland, preserved among the Celtic nations. It was quite a common thing for a giant to put his heart out to nurse, because he did not like the trouble and responsibility of doing it himself. Although I must confess it was a dangerous sort of plan to take, especially with such a delicate viscus as the heart. All this time, Buffy Bob and Tricksy Wee were listening with long ears. "Oh," thought Tricksy Wee, "if I could but find the giant's cruel heart, wouldn't I give it a squeeze?" The giant and giantess went on talking for a long time. The giantess kept advising the giant to hide his heart somewhere in the house, but he seemed afraid of the advantage it would give her over him. "You could hide it at the bottom of the flour barrel," she said. "That would make me feel choky," answered he. "Well, in the coal cellar, or in the dust hole, that's the place. No one would think of looking for your heart in the dust hole." "Worse and worse," cried the giant. "Well, the water butt," suggested she. No, it would grow spongy there," he said. "Well, what will you do with it?" "I will leave it a month longer where it is. Then I will give it to the queen of the kangaroos, and she will carry it in her pouch for me. It is best to change its place, you know, lest my enemies should scent it out. But dear Doodlem, it's a fretting care to have a heart of one's own to look after. The responsibility is too much for me. If it were not for a bite of a radish now and then, I could never bear it." Here the giant looked lovingly towards the row of little boys by the fire, all of whom were nodding or asleep on the floor. "Why don't you trust it to me, dear Thunderthump?" said his wife. "I would take the best possible care of it. I don't doubt it, my love, but the responsibility would be too much for you. You would no longer be my darling, light-hearted, airy, laughing Doodlem. It would transform you into a heavy, oppressed woman, weary of life as I am." The giant closed his eyes and pretended to go to sleep. His wife got his stockings and went on with her darning. Soon the giant's pretense became reality, and the giantess began to nod over her work. "Now, Buffy," whispered Trixie Wee, "now's our time. I think it's moonlight, and we had better be off. There's a door with a hole for the cat just behind us." "All right," said Bob. "I'm ready." So they got out of the broom brake and crept to the door. But to their great disappointment, when they got through it, they found themselves in a sort of shed. It was full of tubs and things, and though it was built of wood only, they could not find a crack. "Let us try this hole," said Trixie, for the giant and giantess were sleeping behind them, and they dared not go back. "All right," said Bob. He seldom said anything else than all right. Now this hole was in a mound that came in through the wall of the shed, and went along the floor for some distance. They crawled into it and found it very dark. But groping their way along, they soon came to a small crack, through which they saw grass, pale in the moonshine. As they crept on, they found the hole began to get wider and led upwards. "What is that noise of rushing?" said Buffy Bob. "I can't tell," replied Trixie, "for you see I don't know what we are in." The fact was they were creeping along a channel in the heart of a giant tree, and the noise they heard was the noise of the sap rushing along in its wooden pipes. When they laid their ears to the wall, they heard it gurgling along with a pleasant noise. "It sounds kind and good," said Trixie. "It is water running. Now it must be running from somewhere to somewhere. I think we had better go on, and we shall come somewhere." It was rather difficult to go on, for they had to climb as if they were climbing a hill, and now the passage was wide, nearly worn out. They saw light overhead at last, and creeping through a crack into the open air, found themselves on the fork of a huge tree. A great, broad, uneven space lay around them, out of which spread boughs in every direction, the smallest of them as big as the biggest tree in the country of common people. Overhead were leaves enough to supply all the trees they had ever seen. Not much moonlight could come through, but the leaves would glimmer white in the wind at times. The tree was full of giant birds. Every now and then one would sweep through with a great noise. But except an occasional chirp, sounding like a shrill pipe in a great organ, they made no noise. All at once an owl began to hoot. He thought he was singing. As soon as he began, other birds replied, making rare game of him. To their astonishment, the children found they could understand every word they sang, and what they sang was something like this: "I will sing a song, I'm the owl. Sing a song, you sing-song, ugly fowl. What will you sing about, night in and day out? Sing about the night, I'm the owl. You could not see for the light, stupid fowl. Oh, the moon and the dew, and the shadows, to who?" The owl spread out his silent, soft, sly wings, and lighting between Trixie Wee and Buffy Bob, nearly smothered them, closing up one under each wing. It was like being buried in a down bed, but the owl did not like anything between his sides and his wings, so he opened up his wings again, and the children made haste to get out. Trixie Wee immediately went in front of the bird, and looking up into his huge face, which was as round as the eyes of the giantess's spectacles, and much bigger, dropped a pretty curtsy and said, "Please, Mr. Owl, I want to whisper to you." "Very well, small child," answered the owl, looking important and stooping his ear towards her. "What is it?" "Please tell me where the eagle lives that sits on the giant's heart." "Oh, you naughty child, that's a secret, for shame." And with a great hiss that terrified them, the owl flew into the tree. All birds are fond of secrets, but not many of them can keep them so well as the owl. So the children went on because they did not know what else to do. They found the way very rough and difficult. The tree was so full of humps and hollows. Now and then they plashed into a pool of rain. Now and then they came upon twigs growing out of the trunk where they had no business, and they were as large as full-grown poplars. Sometimes they came upon great cushions of soft moss, and on one of them they lay down and rested. But they had not lain long before they spied a large nightingale sitting on a branch, with its bright eyes looking up at the moon. In a moment more he began to sing, and the birds about him began to reply, but in a very different tone from that in which they had replied to the owl. Oh, the birds did call the nightingale such pretty names. The nightingale sang, and the birds replied like this: "I will sing a song, I'm the nightingale. Sing a song long, long, little, never fail. What will you sing about, light in or light out? Sing about the light, gone away, down away and out of sight, poor lost day. Mourning for the day dead, over his dim bed." The nightingale sang so sweetly that the children would have fallen asleep, but for fear of losing any of the song. When the nightingale stopped, they got up and wandered on. They did not know where they were going, but they thought it best to keep going on, because then they might come upon something or other. They were very sorry they had forgotten to ask the nightingale about the eagle's nest, but his music had put everything else out of their heads. They resolved, however, not to forget the next time they had a chance. So they went on till they were both tired, and Tricksey Wee said at last, trying to laugh, "I declare my legs feel just like a Dutch doll's." "Then here's the place to go to bed in," said Buffy Bob. They stood at the edge of a last year's nest and looked down with delight into the round mossy cave. Then they crept gently in, and lying down in each other's arms, found it so deep and warm and comfortable and soft that they were soon fast asleep. Now close behind them in a hollow was another nest, in which lay a lark and his wife, and the children were awakened very early in the morning by a dispute between Mr. and Mrs. Lark. "Let me up," said the lark. "It's not time yet," said the lark's wife. "It is," said the lark rather rudely. "The darkness is quite thin. I can almost see my own beak." "Nonsense," said the lark's wife. "You know you came home yesterday morning quite worn out. You had to fly so very high before you saw him. I am sure he would not mind if you took it a little easier. Do be quiet and go to sleep again." "That's not it at all," said the lark. "He doesn't want me. I want him. Let me up, I say." He began to sing, and Tricksey Wee and Buffy Bob, having now learned the way, answered him: "I will sing a song, I am the lark. Sing song, throat song, little kill the dark." "What will you sing about, now the night is out? I can only call, I can't think. Let me up, that's all. Let me drink, thirsting all the long night for a drink of light." By this time the lark was standing on the edge of his nest, looking at the children. "Poor little things, you can't fly," said the lark. "No, but we can look up," said Tricksey. "Ah, you don't know what it is to see the very first of the sun. But we know what it is to wait till he comes. He's no worse for your seeing him first, is he?" "Oh, no, certainly not," answered the lark, with condescension. And then, bursting into his jubilant, he sprang aloft, clapping his wings like a clock running down. "Tell us where," began Buffy Bob. But the lark was out of sight. His song was all that was left of him. That was everywhere, and he was nowhere. Well, I'm not sure where to start.
I know, it's a really odd story. Like, that's George MacDonald. There's really nothing like him for me. Like, he's just, it can get so weird, or it's like, you feel like it's a fairy tale and it's kind of familiar, but then there's all this stuff thrown in that I just have no idea how it all connects. And
Yeah, I was thinking about the names of the children.
yeah.
It's kind of different than some of the names he uses, I guess, in other stories. Trixie Wee and Buffy Bob. I'm not sure why he chose those names, but they're just so kind of off the wall names.
I was thinking about Trixie Wee, that she it conjures up images of a leprechaun for me.
Oh, yeah.
And like a trickster character, but a little one, which to me that is a leprechaun, and it's interesting because I think in a lot of stories the trickster is typically a male figure, but what I really love about George MacDonald is that so many of his really spectacular characters are girls, and they're feminine. But then I feel like also, like, there's a lot of absence of the feminine, and then there's, like, a lot of the shadowy feminine. Like, I feel like aren't grandmothers in his stories kind of evil? Or no? Or old women? Or...
So, yeah, I guess there are some, yeah, for sure.
Yeah, but it's, like, usually, like, I remember in the castle we read, there was this one little girl who just loved, I think she loved, like, collecting things and nature, and... I really loved her, and I thought, she was like George MacDonald, and now I really love Trixie Wee, and she is that, like, trickster character, but the feminine, and...
Yeah. It's kind of fun, the story kind of starts out with Buffy Bob giving her a box on the ear, and then they kind of go off. She went off looking for Buffy Bob, and then when he ran off, I just thought that was kind of cool.
Yeah.
Having small kids, that happens so often, but it's interesting that that's what led them into this adventure. There's probably some symbolism behind that.
I think there is, because I picked up on that too, because I thought it was weird that when she's in the giant's house, there's some comment about how she's never seen unkindness before, but she doesn't count the buff that Buffy Bob gave her as unkind. And go ahead.
She actually felt bad that he felt bad about it, kind of.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting because the story starts out with a little boy and a little girl fighting. He's giving her a buff on the ear. And then in the giant's house, there's definitely a weird, unhealthy relationship between the husband giant and the wife giant, and they're kind of fighting, and Mrs. Giant is crying, and then the Threshes are kind of fighting a little bit. True. So, but it's almost like there's a contrast between all of these fights, and I remember it made me think about how Dr. Jordan Peterson made some comment once about how it's healthy for children to see the friction between their parents, and that tension between, like, the masculine and the feminine is really healthy. But then there's, like, a shadow, dark side to it too, and so I can't help but feel like there's kind of like that being fleshed out a little bit here.
I like how he uses animals throughout the story quite a bit. As we'll read more, there'll be more animals, but the birds, the different types of birds, and their song, and how different their songs are fun. I didn't go into song with them, but it would have probably added something to the story. But I just think that there's something with nature that's coming through too, that ultimately they're kind of starting to seek out these birds to find the eagle. where the heart is. And I'm not exactly sure why they're even looking for the heart. I don't think it says, or hasn't said yet, and why they assume that they'd get help from the other birds on it.
I know. I think in fairy tales, birds aren't always that great in fairy tales. Like, I think about how Hansel and Gretel, when Hansel drops the breadcrumbs, the birds eat it up. And it's like, if you tell the birds too much, they're going to kind of take your secret. But it's interesting because they're like, Trixie Wee is always whispering things into birds, and the owl is wanting to keep it secret, and there is that kind of like play on secretiveness and the birds, and especially the owl.
Yeah, all the birds are fond of secrets, it says, but not many of them can keep them as well as the owl.
Yeah. I love that image of the owl, like, bending his huge head to Trixie Wee, and this little girl whispering into this giant owl's ear. It's really kind of a sweet image to me.
Yeah. I like how it said that the owl didn't like anything between his wings and his body. It's kind of funny. Reminds me of the little things that kids don't like wearing certain socks or,
Yeah, our daughter, oh man, she's gotten a lot. I mean, she's come a long way with socks, but
yeah,
she has always hated socks, unless it's 90 degrees in summer. Then she loves them. But when it's frigid like now, then...
Yeah, she doesn't like them.
Yeah, she doesn't like them. Well, I read it for the first time, I'd say 2 weeks ago or so, or about a week or so ago. And I have been thinking ever since about the boys that the giant likes to eat. Mm-hmm. And a couple of things struck me, like how gruesome the details are.
Yeah.
That George MacDonald provides us, like they want to salt them and pickle them and
fatten them up,
and then one is like a beetle in the pot that she just flings out, and it reminds me of the Cyclops in the Odyssey or Ulysses, and he's talking about like Greek meat, stringy, how the Greeks are stringy, and there's just this really gruesome detail about the Cyclops eating Ulysses' men. I'm sorry, I'm forgetting the Roman name versus the Greek name. That definitely conjured up that for me. And then there's this really interesting part where the giantess tells herself, she tries to comfort herself, that the little boys really are pigs and not little boys. Mm-hmm. And I don't know what to make of that. For me, it could be one or two things. And the first one that I've been thinking about a lot lately is like the giant and his wife are described in terms of nature. Like, I think his name is Thunderclap. Thunderthump. And she's described as having, like, the qualities of a sea.
Yeah.
Like, there's a lot of, like, they're described as just sort of these, like, very powerful but impersonal forces of nature. And I sometimes think what we consider to be evil, there is an impersonal nature at play that isn't necessarily good or evil. It's just a sort of passive, impersonal nature. And so a snake eats a frog, and we think that's really sad. But the snake is just eating a frog. And a part of me feels like these boys, they're described as greedy.
Mm-hmm.
And if only they didn't eat the food, they would be let go. I think that's explicitly said there. But they're too greedy, and so they're fat, and now they're kind of dumb. And so is George MacDonald trying to say that if you act and appear like a pig, you will be mistaken for one by an impersonal force of nature? If you act like a frog, is a snake going to mistake you for a frog and eat you? Or, so that's one way, I think, of considering that. Or is it like a reflection on the power of lack of self-knowledge, or like the disassociation? I know that there are stories of people who worked, like part of their job was working in the concentration camps, and they thought they were just going to work. And it can be really chilling how people can self-deceive themselves in order to justify something, or to just disassociate from the evil that they're doing.
Yeah.
And I mean, it's kind of like him wearing white socks on Sunday. Like the giant, like almost comforts himself that he's eating these boys because he has the whitest socks.
Yeah. Well, when I think about the little boys, I guess I think that maybe they're like sinners, basically. Like, we all know that we shouldn't sin, but we all do it. Yeah, where it says he strode up to the wretched children. What made them wretched was that they did know that if they kept from eating and grew thin, the giant would dislike them and turn them home. But they were greedy, like you said, and they ate as much ever as they could hold. So I think of sinners that way, like all of us are that way, and we can't help ourselves.
Yeah, the spirit is willing, but the flesh is weak.
Yeah, and that's where I think maybe the heroics of Buffy, Bob, and Trixie Wee come into play a little bit, that they're not falling into that. I don't know where these boys came from, but they're definitely like not wanting to go to them. They're forging their own path.
Mm-hmm.
And the boys are quick to point at them that they're the ones that the giant is looking for.
Yeah.
And they're kind of like, there's a point where the giant says, "Now tell me the truth," and then they shook with terror, and everyone hoped it was somebody else the giant liked best.
But they did betray the hiding spot of Trixie Wee and Buffy Bob.
They did.
Mm-hmm.
They told him the truth, like he asked, but yes, they were pretty quick to, because they were afraid of themselves, they were pretty quick to say where they were.
Mm-hmm. In contrast to the giant's own wife, who does lie.
Doesn't tell him.
Yeah, she does lie.
And tries to protect them, tells them to go away.
Yes. She reminds me of the giant in Jack and the Beanstalk because, well, there's a couple versions of Jack and the Beanstalk, but one that I read, the giant's wife tries to help Jack escape. I wonder what that is.
I don't know a lot of other stories about giants, I guess, but the part that says, I refer anyone who doubts this part of my story to certain chronicles of giant land preserved among the Celtic nations.
It's Celtic.
Celtic nations. So is there like a tradition of giant stories in that? I don't know. But it does say it was quite a common thing for a giant to put his heart out to nurse, because he did not like the trouble and responsibility of doing it himself. So I just think that's kind of cool. I don't know if that's something that George MacDonald made up or if he's just playing off of some of the traditions in the past, I guess. Mm-hmm. I've not heard that tradition before. I'm not super learned, so
Oh, yes,
I don't
you
know
are,
if I
Sean.
would hear that, but I kind of like that about the giant Thunderthump, that he doesn't burden his wife with caring for his heart, but he's very particular in the way that it's cared for. So I'm not quite sure if it's because he doesn't have his heart that he's so cruel, maybe. And it kind of mentions that he doesn't want to burden her with the anxiety of watching over the heart.
But he doesn't trust her with it.
Well, that's probably part of it, yes.
I think that's pretty explicit.
But it says that he didn't want to put that burden on her because he didn't want to lose her. There was words. Okay, she asks him, why don't you trust it to me, dear Thunderthump? I would take the best possible care of it. And he says, I don't doubt it, my love, but the responsibility would be too much for you. You would no longer be my darling, light-hearted, airy, laughing doodlum. It would transform you into a heavy, oppressed woman, weary of life as I am. So it's it's a burden for him, and I don't know if that's what they're saying here is that's why he is the way he is, maybe.
Well, it's interesting that he does, he eats boys, though. I mean, he's entrusting his heart somewhere else, but he has to eat boys.
I don't know if he has to, but he likes to.
Yeah, he likes to. I mean, I don't know. I think those two things might be a little bit connected.
In what way, do you think?
What is the heart? It's like your heart's desire, like desire and passion. And if you don't have that, or you're too lazy to look after it yourself, it's almost like you need to take it from others. You need to devour children to fill that empty part of you, or like you need to devour others then, because that's easier and it's not as taxing as looking after your own heart.
Yeah, I could see that.
It's funny though, like I was kind of laughing at all the places the wife suggests for him to put it. Like they're not very nice places.
True.
The dustpan, she says it's because no one would look there.
Yeah. But they're also talking about where it is right in front of the boys, They must not be fearful that they're going to escape.
Yeah.
They know that Trixie Wee and Buffy Bob are there too while they're talking about that.
Yeah.
It doesn't seem proper for them to be talking about it if there's little people running around that they can't find.
Yeah, that's a good point.
But,
yeah. And it's funny, I mean, even entrusting his heart to the eagle, though, I mean, there's a risk there. Like one scratch of her talon.
Yeah. And because, they say it's very delicate. Mm-hmm. And does it have to be in, is that part of it where it has to be kind of in danger?
Yeah, I wonder.
A little bit? Where it's hidden?
Yeah. It sure is
it's going to the kangaroo's pouch next, so that's not that dangerous, I guess. But.
Yeah, that's where I just laugh, and I just think George MacDonald is just... What? I mean, I don't know that everything has a symbol, and I think he's maybe just being funny.
Yeah, I think you're right.
Like, I can just picture little kids laughing at that. Little Scottish kids bouncing on his knee, just giggling about a giant's heart being in a kangaroo's pouch.
Yeah. Our kids really love this story. And I think part of it is the animals and stuff that he talks about. I think it's even better as we go that way. I don't know who the enemies are of the giant either, but he says that he doesn't want his enemies to scent it out. So he keeps moving it. He says it's good to keep moving it so they don't scent it out. But I wonder who his enemies would be. Anybody that would find his heart and kill it, I guess. And there must be some type of danger in that.
Yeah, I'm still a little. It's interesting, like where they are. So I feel like they're on the Trixie Wee winds up on the border, like the in between. I think about like witches traditionally are on the border of things, where it's like kind of like the upside down world. There's a lot of iron imagery when they're entering the giant's house. They think there's that room full of tubs, but then they wind up like inside a tree and they hear the sound of running water.
Mm-hmm.
And even, well, just to circle back to the giant's house, they're hiding in a broom. And I mean, there's really weird as in imagery that just really strikes me, and I'd like to explore further. But in the giant's house, I mean, there's white sock. They're hiding in a broom. There's imagery of cleaning, of dustpans, of the wash. Lots of washing, lots of like, almost like purity, but purity in a very, oh man, like evil way, kind of. I mean, little children are being pickled and salted and cast out like a beetle, but you know, there's washing, there's white socks being knit here, and
yeah,
there's a broom and the children are hiding in it. Yeah, it does make me think about George MacDonald's struggle with Calvinism and just maybe how giant that force was for him in his inner life. But yeah, it definitely, I think it hurts the giant's wife that he doesn't want his heart there, because she does. Because she like kind of cries about that. Yeah, okay, haha, you don't know where it is, wife. I moved it a month ago. What a man you are, Thunderthump. You trust any creature alive rather than your own wife. Here the giantess gave a sob, which sounded exactly like a wave going flop into the mouth of a cave up to the roof.
Yeah.
Where have you got it now? She resumed, checking her emotion.
Yeah, you're right. Is that a genuine sob, though, the way that he describes it?
Well,
I guess
I don't know. I mean, it's like, he knows his wife lies to him, and she does lie to him. I don't know. Their relationship is really weird.
Well, she definitely seems to suggest places that don't make any sense to him. So I'm almost curious if she's even trying, you know, to suggest places that...
Yeah.
Or if she's just trying to egg him on a little bit.
Yeah.
Almost poking fun of the way he handles it.
Yeah, it
I
could
kind of
be.
get that sense a little bit.
Yeah, it's funny. I mean, the giant tells her it's wicked to tell lies. So there is he has like a moral code, this giant, but he eats little boys.
Yeah, I don't know. Maybe we'll learn more here as the story goes.
Yeah.
I still don't know exactly why Trixie Wee and Buffy Bob just immediately search out for the heart instead of just running away.
Yeah, I feel like they're definitely on an adventure. I mean, they're caught in this in-between world. There is just like this weird like passivity to this story. It says they went on because they didn't know what else to do.
Yeah. Maybe they're trying to save the boys. I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, I guess that kind of plays into Trixie Wee being the trickster character because the trickster character typically chooses death. They choose that path rather than being safe.
She's tricky more than just her name is, you know. Does she do anything that's real tricky? Because Buffy Bob was the one that kind of boxed her on the ear. But I guess she's definitely the leader because it said that Buffy Bob basically, all he says is, all right.
I know.
Or seldom said anything else than all right.
Yeah, I feel like I think
she's the leader of the two.
Yes, and I do think her name is significant.
Yeah.
I do.
But I don't know that she does anything tricky yet. Right?
No, yeah, I mean, she's whispering into the owl's ear, asking about where the eagle's nest is, where the giant, I mean, maybe even, I don't know, maybe the fact that she even had that thought is kind of tricky, or
maybe.
Whose idea is it to hide in the broom?
Trixie's.
Yeah.
You're kind of thinking of like the jester as the one that chooses death, kind of.
Yeah, it's typically like the fool who chooses death. I mean,
I just don't know if she's a fool character yet.
Yeah, I don't know. I feel like the fool and the trickster are I don't know, are they the same thing? I feel like they're very similar. You pointed out, though, it is kind of foolish to go looking for the giant's heart. I mean, it's far safer to just run home and get the heck out of there.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah. Assuming they know how to go home, I guess they kind of just end up in this giant land.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah. It's almost like, that part of that inevitable aspect of the story. Like the boys are going to get eaten because they look like pigs, and the children are going to keep going because there's nothing else to do.
All they did was go run off into the wood.
She's running toward the fire.
But she's only running at first to find Buffy Bob. So Buffy Bob is kind of the one that started it. Because he ran into the wood first. And he was still running. He ended up running into her, basically, in the giant's home. And just the way she interacts right away with the giantess. Like, she's saying that she didn't do anything wrong. I've not been naughty to your husband. And he won't hurt me.
She kind of starts out a little naive. Maybe.
Yeah. Almost like it's just feeling to me like she wasn't trying to get into this adventure. She kind of fell into it and then is kind of working through it. Leading her brother through it.
Yeah, I mean, I think maybe more there's sort of like a transition in her character. Like, she kind of starts out a little too naive, and then maybe seeing the boys and the giants and that whole interaction changes her a little bit. And
maybe she's growing up a little bit.
Yeah, she goes from being a little bit too naive to choosing like this path now that she is going to look for the giant's heart.
And maybe that's why she's going to look for it. There's that one part where they were listening to the giant and his wife talking about his heart. And she says, if I could find but the giant's cruel heart, wouldn't I give it a squeeze? So maybe that's what she's just so taken back by the cruelty of the giant that she just wants to kill him.
Yeah, I mean, by squeeze, does she mean squeeze it, or does she mean, like, love it?
I'm pretty sure she means, like, squeeze it out and kill it.
Squeeze it out, kill it, yeah.
Because she referred to it as the giant's cruel heart. But that's a good question. I guess could probably read it that way, too.
Because I have not read this entire story. I have only read basically up until where we left off. So I don't know what's going to happen in the end.
It'll be interesting to see what you think at the end.
Yeah. Well, we will resume this story in about, 2 weeks' time, I think is what we're hoping for. And any final thoughts, Sean, on the first half of The Giant's Heart?
No, I think the story just gets better and better. I would say that. So I'm looking forward to the next one a lot.
Well, great. Well, then, listeners, please do stay tuned and subscribe so that you are alerted when the next episode of The Giant's Heart comes out. Thank you for listening. If you appreciate our content and would like to help further bring George MacDonald and his works back into the culture, consider supporting us on Patreon. There is a link to that page in our show notes. And we will see you next time on the George MacDonald and Us podcast.
Thank you, everyone.